I just knew like no matter what, I was going to be working with people, and that would be important. Um, so yeah. So anyways, uh, as we were doing that, I was taking these classes. I was discovering I was watching some of that phenomenon occur in front of me. So if I would get a contract with say Intercore International, a big corporation. I'd have the CFO and the president and somebody else all there. And they'd be taking a rock climbing class and they would start making the metaphors, the analogies real quick. They'd be passing them back and forth like, this is just like that project 2 years ago that blah, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. And so we started even teaching towards that direction. So even started thinking like, okay, if you want a higher performing team, why don't you work out some of your performance issues when it's about something that doesn't matter the same way, right? And so we would see that happen. We'd have them 4 pitches or a few 100 feet off the ground and ask for them, how would you like to arrange yourselves? And there would be some really interesting conversations based upon their past or the labels they had created for each other or any of those things. And rock climbing and that, or alpine climbing, depending on which one it was, would sometimes be a vehicle for them to relabel each other. So somebody would act outside of their previous label based upon the different environment, and that would change their sort of value standing within that group, right? And so anyways, there were just some real interesting things occurring, and when that was happening, I realized it was in fact an educational tool. And so as I continued to run the guide services and so forth, I found a community college where they were doing interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary learning. So they were doing 2-week expeditions on the Buffalo River in Arkansas. They were canoe trips, and they would bring an environmental science professor and like a creative writing instructor with them. And so they'd go down the river and stop after a rapid and do specimen collection or seine for water samples or whatever. And then they'd do plant pressings, and then they'd journal about a particular thing that night and then set up time for class. It was amazing. It was contextual education for the first time. Instead of someone saying like, oh, you have to know this math because one day you'll have to balance your checkbook, which you probably know, you and I probably haven't really balanced our checkbook in a number of years, right? So instead of putting off the reason why you need to know this, the context was proximal. It was right there in front of us. And so the same thing would happen when we were teaching. We'd say, oh, instead of sitting around in a circle and saying, you may need to know this knot one day, people would get to the top of a climb, be 150 feet off the ground. And I would say, would you like to learn a knot to tie in? And they always say yes. Nobody's ever told me no, right? So they always say yes. So the context is really helpful. And the same thing goes for teaching group dynamics. It's one thing to say that they want to be in a high performing team. It's another thing when you're on the side of a glacier, knowing that there are consequences to being poor performing. Most of the time, people are really bought in. And um, anyways, after finishing my undergrad, I got recruited by somebody at Texas A&M who left for a different school. Um, and they recruited me. I was filling in for them at Texas A&M in an interim uh, way, and then they recruited me to Ole Miss, to the University of Mississippi, because within a couple of months of them being there, they were promoted. And so I got the opportunity to, as a graduate assistant, be the coordinator for that program. And then after I finished my graduate degree, I stayed on for a couple of years after that because it happened to match. It was a place where we could find that my wife could go to optometry school at the same time. So yeah, so that's kind of the hodgepodge of information. When I got here, someone said to me, my director at the time said, there's 3 people in a similar field here at OSU. And he said, that's pretty unprecedented. It seems like we should have an institute or something. And so we started the work of defining what would that be, what would it look like, and what would be our curriculum. And it took us, there was enough baggage when we talk about creating high performing teams. There was enough baggage around some of the stuff that had occurred here that it took us maybe a year and a half of mediated conversations with an additional year and a half of our own conversations to get to a functional place where we can move forward. It took a long time to get the wheels on the track and get them to start rolling. So, but